The City Election Commission will be conducting 2 primary and 2 general elections during 1996. In doing so, the Commission wants to ensure that the voters are satisfied with the operation. That includes a systematic inspection of all voting machines to assure that each vote is accurately counted.
The Optech machines, they're called Optech 2s. Basically, we run tests on the machines prior to each election, making sure if there's a candidate's name listed on the ballot, that candidate is the person who receives the vote. We do that for all of the candidates.
The voting machine will accept the ballot no matter how you put it in if it is marked correctly. If it isn't, the ballot will be rejected. Make sure you wait to see that the ballot isn't returned to you and that your vote is registered.
The ballot will be accepted any way you put it in. You can put it in face up, you can put it in face down, you can put it in upside down, or the correct way, face up. It will be accepted. The ballot still will be accepted. What we ask you to do is to stand there and wait for your ballot to be accepted, your vote to be counted, and therefore the number will increase by 1. However, the ballot will not be accepted if your entry has been erased, if you have cross-voted or have voted incorrectly in any way. Your ballot will spit out, and that's why we ask you to wait until the number is increased by 1, because if you as a voter would leave, we have no idea what to do with your ballot, so we cannot reinsert it.
Election inspectors and poll workers are briefed before each election day to make sure proper procedures are followed and that the voting process is as pleasant as possible. You can help them and save yourself some time by pre-registering if you're voting for the first time or have changed your name or address, but it's not necessary.
We do have on-site registration, meaning that an individual can register to vote the day of the election. They must bring to the polls, however, 2 forms of identification, both listing their current address.
The state legislature, hoping to give Wisconsin voters more of a say in the presidential race, decided last year to move our presidential primary and spring general election to the 3rd Tuesday in March. At the same time, Wisconsin's regular nonpartisan spring primary moved forward to the 1st Tuesday in February.
Milwaukee voters will not have a primary for mayor and the number of other local offices, but there will be a primary for county executive and some other important decisions for Milwaukeeans in the February 6th election.
The Election Commission would like to increase voter registration to 71% of all eligible voters in 1996 and will expand the opportunities for registration with the help of community groups. Commissioners will also continue to encourage people who cannot vote on Election Day to use an absentee ballot or stop in at their office to vote.
If you're not able to come to the polls, you must send to us in writing a request for an absentee ballot. You can be placed on a permanent list if you are elderly or handicapped, meaning for every election we will mail you the absentee ballot. In addition to that, if you're unavailable to vote on that election day, you can place a request in for an absentee ballot as well. If you would like to, you can also vote in our office. All absentee ballot requests must be made by the Friday before the election. That's the last date in which we can mail out the absentee ballots by state law. However, if you would like to vote in the office, you can do that up until the day before the election.
November 27, 1995. The first major snowstorm of the season creates massive traffic jams. The heavy snow and high winds cause many problems. And with the challenge facing sanitation crews, the storm also brought the season's first snow emergency.
Well, a snow emergency is declared by the Commissioner of Public Works whenever he feels it's necessary, based on the severity of the storm, to restrict parking even further than it normally is.
A snow emergency remains in effect as long as necessary, but usually no more than 72 hours. When that happens, any car parked in an area posted as a snow emergency tow-away zone can be towed immediately. Parking is banned between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. on any street that is part of a bus route and prohibited on most major arterial streets. An additional restriction covers some east side streets when snow exceeds 2 inches.
The snow emergency is really designed to enable us to get our plows to the curb in a bigger snowstorm so that we can do a better job of clearing it up. For example, when we have to go around a parked car, you'll lose 3 to 5 parking places, say downtown or on a business district street going around it. We're trying to minimize that and get those types of big streets cleared up curb to curb as quickly as possible.
With a snow emergency, the Sanitation Division immediately notifies most TV and radio stations and others to review the parking restrictions. The city also notifies public safety agencies, city officials, and the public school system. Quite often, people don't hear the announcement, but that won't help if you get a ticket. It's still your responsibility to know the regulations, assume there is a snow emergency if the storm is a big one, and park accordingly, or call someone.
Really the big thing when we're getting a snowstorm, people should be aware that the possibility exists. They should obey all the posted parking signs, and if people are in doubt, they can always call the city. The city hall operator is on duty 24 hours a day, and if there's a snow emergency in effect, sanitation will certainly be working. So you can call the sanitation number and find out, and that's really the way to be safe. Check first.
Of course, it doesn't take a snow emergency to change your parking habits in the wintertime.
The winter parking regulations tend to be very complicated. However, the best advice I would give to people is to look at the signs that are on the street that they elect to park on. If you choose to park overnight in the city of Milwaukee between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., you must get an overnight parking permit issued from the Milwaukee Police Department. And the kinds of changes that happen in the winter months are on many streets, there's signs posted that say no parking December 1st to March 1st, and you must get off of those streets and not park on that side so signed. There's other areas of the cities where we have a monthly switch where you can park on the same side of the street in the month of December and February, but you switch to the opposite side of the street in January. And the last thing is on the through highways, and these are streets that generally have bus routes. The wider streets, or the streets are protected by stop signs. They have traffic signals along them. Those are the streets where you can't park overnight, generally, on most of them at all, unless there's lists of those, once again, it's a little more complicated, lists of streets where we call them exception streets, where the traffic volumes are lighter, there's no bus route, and some of those streets we do allow overnight parking to take place.
For those whose parked cars are clogging Milwaukee streets and preventing complete snow removal, the penalties can range from parking fines to having the car towed away.
The winter parking regulations were put in place to keep the roads open for emergency vehicles. So we've had situations on some narrow residential streets in past winters where the snow accumulated and the road got narrower and narrower, where fire trucks found it difficult to get down the street and they had to approach a fire from a different way, and that adds precious seconds into their response time. We try and get as many of those parked cars off the streets as possible to make it easier for sanitation to plow the streets.
Some other winter reminders: check on your homebound neighbors. Remember, recycling and garbage collection can be affected. And try to clear those fire hydrants and catch basins near your homes. The city appreciates the help.
A lot of people are very good, and what's nice is when you're out working through the night and you see people helping each other, or we'll come through on one side of the street and we'll plow it, and then you'll see people coming out of their houses and moving their cars over to the cleared side so we can come back and clean up the other side. Those are the types of things that really help us, and it helps them get their streets back in good conditions quicker too.
And when you might be tempted to complain about the weather and its consequences, it might be fun to look back to those hot, scorching days of last July. Then you might have thought how wonderful it would be to enjoy the refreshing, cool winds, snow and ice of a Milwaukee winter. or maybe not. The new system of river walks in Milwaukee, the Brady Street reconstruction and renovation, skywalk, air rights, and public viewing rights. Just a few of the many oversight activities of the Milwaukee City Plan Commission. 7 citizens appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the Common Council, an advisory group that oversees activities of city planners within the Department of City Development. Some examples from a recent meeting: plans for a rooming house, a restaurant with a drive-through, a secondhand store, gas station, daycare center, and church addition. All reviewed to make sure none has an adverse impact on the surrounding neighborhood. Marquette University's plans to close all or a part of Wisconsin Avenue through the campus neighborhood brought the commission a great deal of attention. You might recall that more than 700 people turned out for one public hearing on that proposal, which ultimately died in a council committee.
It's difficult. That is a decision that has a bearing on literally everybody who lives and works in this community. And we had to weigh the issues very, very carefully. Not all of us, as you know, had the same opinion on that issue, and it's very rare that we do.
Retaining the unique characteristics of Milwaukee neighborhoods is a priority. With a push from the commission, Osco Drugs agreed to redesign its new store at Brady and Farwell. Instead of a typical suburban design with large setbacks, the company agreed to move the building to the sidewalk so it would be more compatible with existing buildings in the historic neighborhood. The city's new system of riverwalks has drawn a lot of attention from the Plan Commission. Commissioners continually reviewed the overall plan to make sure designs of the various segments were consistent and pedestrian-friendly, and they compared our riverwalk with others.
A number of us individually had spent some time in San Antonio that's often touted as the epitome of riverwalks. And my goodness, all that is, first of all, it's a little creek. It isn't a river at all by Wisconsin standards. And it's a series of very steep steps and then a little bit of a plaza. And then you go up these steep steps once again. And it's not the beautiful esplanade that's planned for this city, which the Plan Commission was very much involved in the original development of that plan. In terms of skywalks, we're looking at the air rights, of course, the aesthetic issues, looking at, for example, the view. And that is important. You don't think of it all the time. But how would a skywalk obstruct the view that people normally would have, particularly in a city like this on many of our wonderful streets and avenues? And then you have to balance that with the convenience, the economic viability, and what it would mean to the future development of this city.
Long-range planning for the city includes a desire to see an approach that considers the needs of modern cities, but maintains the unique architecture of our past and the character of Milwaukee.
To do as much as we possibly can to preserve this wonderful tradition of neighborhood that really has made this city, I think, in many ways what it is, and made it so different in terms of an enhanced quality of life from many cities of comparable size. And that is something that weighs very heavily on the minds of the commissioners as they're making the decisions. And notwithstanding, to actually be a forum for the public so that they can make their concerns known about their neighborhood, about their property, and hopefully so we can reach a common understanding of what makes sense in particular areas of the city for the people who live there now and the people who will live and work there in the future.
Are you at risk for AIDS? The greatest risk remains unprotected sex with an HIV-infected person. That's compounded with the addition of multiple partners. The fastest growing risk category is injection drug users sharing contaminated needles. And in increasing numbers, Women infected with the virus are passing it along to their children before, during, or after birth.
Normally, when germs, such as bacteria or viruses, get into our bodies, white blood cells and antibodies attack and destroy them. One kind of white cell that's very important in helping the immune system to work properly is the T cell. Unfortunately, when the human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV, gets into a person's body, it heads right for the T cells, where HIV multiplies, finally killing so many T cells that after a while the body can no longer fight off infection.
When I found out about my diagnosis of AIDS, at first my reaction was one of like punishment. What did I do wrong? Did I disappoint somebody? And now I realize, that it's not about that. It's about not informing myself.
When I was pregnant, I asked my doctor for the test, and she thought I didn't need it. And afterwards, I found out that I was HIV positive, and so is my baby.
I'm just wondering, what does it take to keep everybody focused on not getting this virus?
10 years ago, I used to think that AIDS was a gay man's disease. It wasn't until I saw my second husband, Bill, on a Dan Rather special, saying he was dying of AIDS. I went in and got tested, and sure enough, it came back I was positive.
I think the number of teenagers is rising so rapidly is because, for one thing, they're in denial. They think they're immortal. They don't think that it could happen to them.
But it does happen. Over 1 million people in this country are believed to have been infected with the virus that causes acquired immune deficiency syndrome.
We have a worsening, fatal, epidemic disease on our hands. And no community in this country or anywhere in the world has yet found a way to stop it or even really to slow it down very much. So as much as AIDS in the past couple of years may have sort of dipped a little bit in terms of media attention, it is an epidemic that is worsening, and it's worsening right here in Milwaukee.
According to the Wisconsin Department of Health and Social Services, the number of AIDS cases through September of '95 totaled 3,051, with over 5,100 recorded cases of HIV infection. About half are in Milwaukee County. The number of AIDS-related deaths in the same 12-year period reached 1,765, 187 of them during the first 9 months of 1995. The Milwaukee Health Department is very active in the effort to control the spread of HIV infection. Public health clinics offer some treatment services, but primarily they provide confidential and free testing, diagnosis, prevention, education, and counseling.
AIDS is a killer, and right now there is no known cure for it. It can take up to 10 years to develop AIDS after being infected with the HIV virus. Once a person develops AIDS, their body cannot fight off other diseases. A person who has AIDS is very likely to get sick from infections, cancers, and other viruses that have no cure.
The Milwaukee AIDS Project is the largest AIDS service provider in the state, offering care and support for about 1,200 people. The 10-year-old group provides legal, housing, and other support services, an AIDS library and food pantry, clean needle exchange program, and a clinic for trial drugs. Its caseload has increased 20% in each of the last 4 years.
Well, the demographics of AIDS in Milwaukee has changed dramatically over the past 5 to 10 years. There is not any question but that we are confronting in this city a multicultural disease that is affecting men and women and children from every walk of life.
While still overwhelmingly a disease of adults, there's a growing concern about HIV and young people. And Nelson says he hopes schools, churches, and parents will do more to educate the next generation about HIV and its consequences.
Adolescents and teens and young adults are more and more at risk, and my worry is that the new waves as we move into this next generation or next decade of AIDS, that the new wave of AIDS will be among much younger people.
An awareness that AIDS is more than a gay man's disease is stressed at such events as AIDS Walk Wisconsin. Tipper Gore, wife of the vice president, served as honorary co-chair of the 1995 event. It drew more than 10,000 people and raised nearly $800,000 to be used for a variety of treatment, prevention, and research efforts.
We feel very strongly that AIDS is above all, a human disease, and it affects men and women and children and adults and black and white and rich and poor, every person in the community. And we need to speak loudly and clearly to get that message out to people who need to hear it.
Events like this, other community and corporate support, and grants from all units of government help fund the Milwaukee AIDS Project. But with a growing caseload and uncertainty over funding, the group must also look to some unusual ways to raise money.
Survival Revival Resale Shop is a symbol of the diversification that we have in our fundraising effort. Survival Revival is one of those unique retail operations that in many cities around the country have been very successful in generating a base of income for organizations like ours. We just opened Survival Revival a year ago, and we project that in its first year it will gross over $120,000. And we will in the first year generate a small profit.
With community demands for aggressive prevention efforts, Nelson says the group is doubling its efforts to change the habits of those who engage in high-risk behaviors.
That really has become our mission on the prevention side, to be as aggressive as we can, to move away from sort of the general AIDS education approach, which I think over 10 years has served us well and serve the community well, and move much more aggressively into the tough areas of helping people change the behaviors that put them and their families and their loved ones at risk.
A cure for AIDS remains years away. Eliminating risky behaviors is still the only way to prevent the spread of HIV. But with continued research and new opportunities for combination drug therapies, there is some hope.
I think there's a sense of optimism that we truly may see in the next year and 2 years some movement and some progress in extending life for people who are living with HIV and AIDS. And it's the first time in many years that sense of optimism is being expressed. And of course, if we can make progress in extending life, then I think we become closer to the real goal here of stopping the fatalities. So I'm optimistic.